to the campus of North Idaho College and today's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to part 4 of our 4-part series that we've been dealing with the question of art in life and leisure. I failed to recognize something last week that I should when our guest was Dr. Raleigh Silver. She's written a very interesting book, and if she initiated an interest in this subject with you, we have it in our library. It is entitled Developing Cognitive and Creative Skills Through Art. It is with the University Park Press in Baltimore, 1978. But as I've indicated, you're welcome to borrow the copy that we have in our library if you would like to view that. In part 4 of this series of Art in Life and Leisure, we're happy to welcome to our program Dr. Nellie Arnold, who chairs the Department of Recreation and Leisure Studies at San Jose State University in California. As to educational background, she holds both baccalaureate and master degrees from Southern Illinois University and received her Doctor of Recreation from Indiana University in 1972. She is on campus with us today to talk about life and leisure and how that fits the other topics that we've been dealing with on this program for the past 3 weeks. Dr. Arnold, welcome to our program.
Thank you.
I also wish to welcome back one of our regular panelists that's been with me from almost the conception of this program, Mary Lou Reed, holding a baccalaureate degree from Mills College and did her graduate work in religion at Columbia University. Lou, welcome.
Thank you very much, Tony.
Also want to welcome as a visiting panel member Neil Everts, who is a member of the faculty of North Idaho College teaching in the field of photography. Neil, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tony.
We'll get to questioning at once, and the first series of questions will come from Mary Lou Reed.
Dr. Arnold, will you give us your definition of leisure? Is leisure the absence of work, or is leisure what we do because we want to do it?
Oh, you've given me a few minutes to say something I think that takes a lot of time. A lot of different people have definitions of leisure, and I think it becomes a very personal thing. Working with artists, I'm working on a definition that perceives leisure really as an atmosphere, not anything to do with time. It's an atmosphere that they create, on the job or in the neighborhood, in the home. And it comes very much from the Greek concept, of place, creating your own space, your own sense, your mental place. And this is the, concept that I like to work with.
Then the value of leisure within that concept is that it's an individual fulfillment. How would you define the satisfaction that derives from the creation of that space?
I think it's very much a personal, the personal value, but it also allows people to have power, over their own creation, allows them to have power over giving them the opportunities to say, I'm creating my space, I'm creating my time, I'm taking this concept of beauty or, into the work setting, not waiting till experience leisure after you've had work, but you're experiencing it on the job or, on vacation or in a longer life. So it is personal as well as, I think, giving people a sense of more control.
You're saying it's something then that you create at all times. This is not an either work or leisure. This is something that you take with you wherever you are.
If you're that lucky. I think there are times when work and drudgery can come into life, and I think the space concept is the idea of at times you can create for yourself the enjoyment. You don't have to wait to be in leisure just to enjoy life, which I think a lot of people feel that this they don't enjoy work, so they wait till leisure to enjoy. And with this idea of an atmosphere, we're saying enjoy your work. Don't just rush through your work in order to enjoy life later on. Create and change your work environment, which ties the arts into it. Allow the work to be a beautiful place too, not just the factory or just not a business building or just not a studio. It's the environment that you'd stay in for 12 hours if you had the opportunity to.
It's an attitude as well as anything else.
Yes, very much so.
Neil Everts.
Dr. Arnold, do you have any theories on ways to persuade so-called workaholics to slow down and enjoy leisure? This is one of the things we find in photography. People rush by and do not see the picture.
Well, that's a hard one, because I think sometimes artists and recreation and leisure people are the hardest working people. You know, they're working at it. If you're enjoying your work and are not having the levels of stress, then I don't try to, you know, slow people down, because there is the level of enjoyment and the thrill, the vitality for life, I think, is important. But if they have stress involved, there's only so much stress. And I think we come to people on that level, how much stress is involved in your job, you know, how much stress can you tolerate. And this is where I think the move toward the holistic medicine is very helpful, where people are beginning to say, you know, I've got to control the amount of stress I'm feeling and the amount of time spent, say, in a work environment and not enjoying it. Enjoyment is very, very key, I think.
I think that even artists or photographers tend to compete with kind of the area from which I was approaching it, and consequently they tend to go too fast or be too busy in some cases. And I was just wondering if there was a system or some way to take it a little bit easy and enjoy the arts.
Not a system, but certainly I think one of the things that artists need to do is perhaps help people capture this. I think some of the art that came out in leisure, it was very, very shocking, was deliberately done, you know, that way to shock people into seeing and stopping and looking. You know, painting something very, very bright or something absolutely absurd, and people say, that's not art, you know, that's, and I think part of the reason for doing that was to make people do exactly, you know, what you're saying, to stop and pay attention to some of the other moments of beauty.
Thank you.
Dr. Arnold, I'd like to get specific on the program, because I always perceive the audience is sitting there saying, no, what can I do? They want a formula, and so this might be difficult. But when you mentioned that one should enjoy their work, and that brings the leisure actually into the work, and I would suspect not only produce better health, but also even better accomplishments on the job. Can you give us any specifics with your expertise of what an individual could do to make it more pleasurable at their work, especially for those who might be viewing that aren't enjoying what they're doing? Is it all in decorative processes, that is, just changing the look of the room, so forth, or can you do specifics in the job itself? What would you recommend to someone to make it more pleasant and enjoyable?
Well, I think there are a combination of things that you can do. The environment stimulates behavior, and if the environment is boring and dull and you know, it doesn't have some of the fabrics or the textures of life, then the people in it, you know, will not be stimulated to do some other things. So I think approaching changing the environment to make it exciting and livable, and that is very important. And then the other is allowing people to enjoy the social contacts, because if they don't enjoy the work, there are social contacts, there are other things that they do enjoy in life. Now, the Industrial Recreation Association has been formed, you know, to do this kind of thing, to work on flex time, to work in recreation programs where the public is allowed to take half an hour coffee break or an hour, where they actually have exercise programs or recreation programs or art programs. We have fitness training programs. They have programs for women to learn about children and child care, and doing some of these other kinds of things, which makes it an interesting environment. Now, it doesn't always change the job, but it gives them the break. That social contact and the time when they break down where people on a first-name basis and you're not always worried about the boss is very, very important. And they're saying those coffee breaks and running in the gym and, you know, doing some of the physical dancing and those exercises, everyone becomes, you know, on an equal basis. And that is very important to some of these people.
So this is actually going on, I'm thinking of industry in particular,
yes,
some of the factories
industry.
that are building this. Maybe that's one reason why at the university level, educators have been somewhat more content, because they have those things already in the gyms and so forth. One more question before I go back to the panel. I was viewing a program the other day in which there was an experimentation with some of the prison facilities in this country, county jails in particular, and they are painting them different colors and contending that the prisoners are more content and less violent because of the changing colors. What is your opinion on that type of approach to one's behavior?
Well, I think that becomes a very touchy subject. I know that we've been experimenting with the color of pink. And if you go into perhaps some of the psychology of the color, it may not be making people happy, but it may be subduing them. And it depends on which level, shades. It can be a very, very depressing color. And so I think we have to be very careful when, we're making the general statements about, painting the prison is going to make everybody happy. I worry, a little, but I would not want to live in an environment where everything was one color. And I certainly wouldn't want to live in a pink environment. Now, that there have been enough studies, however, that show that has, it has some effect. And if it does bring the behavior to a level where someone can move into counseling, then I would condone that. But I think the prison systems and some of our schools, and I'll be political in that, have been neglected, human development, from the lack of this stimulation, of making everything gray, but, not providing that stimulation, that excitement, the photographs and the murals, keeping everything at a very, very sterile kind of environment. And I'm concerned about that in a prison scene, but it's also in a school scene.
Lou Reed.
In a prison scene, it seems rather manipulative, doesn't it? If you're going to maybe paint everything light blue to subdue people, but actually you could also put everyone into a serious depression of some sort. Is this what you're saying, that it really should have a lot more variety and a lot more sensitivity to the individual?
I think we need to study a great deal. You can see overt behavior of what happens to people by your control of color. I think we need to study that a little bit more in the long range, what has actually happened to these people. If you're just using the color, to adjust them to what you want at that particular time. But if they stay there and live in it for a long time, which has been the case, I think, where the color pink is supposed to be very subduing, I worry a little bit about what happens to the eventual growth of that person.
Next question I have for you. Just before we started the program, you said that you're currently working on developing strategies for helping artists, and we had to quit. Would you continue on with what these strategies are and how it will help the artists?
Well, for the last year, I've been working as consultant to the state in California for Parks and Recreation, and have left my job basically on leave from the university for 2 years now to do this work. We're working a system where, without exchange of money, we can help community people be involved with their parks. We're working basically on a barter system. We have about 7 or 8 strategies where one of them is have an artist in residence. And when you don't have money to pay an artist, you may have a beautiful building or an apartment or something that could be turned into this where you could house an artist, which may end up to be $400 or $500 a month in actuality. And in exchange for that, the artist will do some mural work for us, photography, help with some of the interpretation program. Now, that's one of the strategies that we hope will be, very successful. And then we're doing the same kind of concept with the sharing of studios, that many artists will need space, and studio space is expensive, gallery space is expensive. Well, many park and recreation places or even churches have that kind of space that could be adjusted. So we're saying, right, if the artist has the excitement and they can make the environment come alive, then use that skill from them, but give them something in exchange. So the bartered studio will have a great master painter, for instance, working with his 5 students or his one student at a time, and then the audience has a chance to watch the teaching, and he may be willing to do, or she may be willing to do, 1 master class or 2 master classes a month for students who can't afford it. But that's what you would barter, in exchange, that you give him the space and then he would, do those master classes. So it's based on those kinds of strategies, and so far they've been very, very, exciting.
I understand that these then would be implementing strategies, implementing your list of trends that you see in art and leisure. And so is that right? You really are pushing your thinking the next step beyond identifying what some of the trends are and ways that people can combine art and leisure, and then developing strategies that really make it possible for actual artists to. Is that
Yes,
all
I'd
right?
say.
Well, next time around, I'll ask you about trends.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you've joined our program in progress, we're bringing you today part 4, and the last in our series of Art in Life and Leisure, and our guest is Dr. Nellie Arnold, who holds a doctorate from Indiana University and has been chairing the Department of Recreation and Leisure Studies at San Jose State University. We're talking with her about life and leisure. We shall continue the questioning with Neil Edwards.
Dr. Arnold, has photography been a means of communications in your projects, and if so, in what ways?
I think photography is very, very much a media, communication tool. In the parks, we've been photographing for a number of years and using photography to do some interpretation. I think what we're going to try and do now is make it become much more a live art form for the public, because everyone, or most, I shouldn't say everyone, but many people do play around a little bit in photography. They want to take a picture of their vacation spots. So we're going to be offering courses in which a photographer will be in residence as an artist, say in a museum. And we're thinking about this in one of the museums in California, which is a train museum. And people come and learn how to photograph a train, and how to develop their equipment, how to display it, because this becomes a real art. And it's one of those skills, I think, that can be a wonderful leisure hobby, for people.
To expand on that a little bit, I was on the West Coast recently, and there are some photo galleries over there. Do you see art and photography expanding into galleries in your area and the things you're working on?
Yes, I would say so. I know that there are maybe some people that do not feel photography is an art form.
That's right.
And I think in the leisure environment, we're trying to redefine art, in many ways, so that it is something people can participate in. We're not necessarily talking about great works of art, but in photography, that can become a great form. We do have galleries that are strictly for photographs and those strictly for paintings. I've not tried merging the two, but that would be an experiment.
Yes, it would. Thank you.
Lou Reed.
Well, back to trends on art and leisure. Would you talk a little bit more about art in the park and group art experiences and what the significance of it is, both for communities and for artists and for everyone involved?
The concept, I think, of art in the park, if I could just indicate that maybe people feel that as soon as you're talking about community art, or you're talking about taking art into a public place like a park, you're talking about a lesser, level, of experience. And I think this is one of the things in our program in California. We're trying to say that art is part of everyday life, or it should be. And you can have experiences with great art forms, but then we want people to understand and experience and appreciate great art. It helps if they participate. So our trend is really to provide the inspiring, the great experiences, the great performers, the great artwork that you capture. You just say, this is a marvelous thing, and then to say, look, try it. And it doesn't have to be the marvelous thing, but for you, let's try picking up the skill. So we're doing things of the bartering, the artist in residence, allowing people to develop their own festival. Now, if we run festivals for people, then if something happens to us, the festival dies. But if it's initiated from them, and it comes from their ideas, their sense of what their community is about, then it grows. We found it very successful.
And we've seen that happen here in Coeur d'Alene,
Yes.
in which the community actually just evolved an art fair and then included eventually performing arts. And is this
Yes.
generally the way the pattern goes, that you get a broader and broader range, spectrum of arts represented as these ideas develop?
Yeah, I think the very good place to begin, is the festival. And then there is a natural evolution, because if you learned a little bit this year, you want more skills, you want to become better, you want a place to show. They were talking to me today about a gallery here and how some people wanted a gallery. Well, that's the next indication that there's that level, there's that need, and it won't be long before there will be a gallery, because enough people want to exhibit their work, want to share what they've done. And again, it doesn't have to be the kind of thing other people are going to pay for. the experience of the moment, the capture, the photography, how you can capture, that moment of beauty, and that could hang in a gallery or in a church or someplace like that. Festivals, though, I think are the major place to start.
Is it normal to have the question of excellence provide a certain amount of tension within this kind of situation where you're making a choice between the neighborhood kids and maybe the artists in the next town who maybe have more saleable, more outstanding work? Is this a constant factor?
It's a constant factor, and I think rightly so. I think we've learned not to mix up professional artists with amateurs, because there are certain levels, that people want their art to stand at. If you are working and you're playing with your art form, that's one thing. But if it's your livelihood and it's, you've put all your life into it, you're talking about another ball game. So we have festivals that are strictly juried, and to show in those or to perform in those, you do pass, the competitions, or you go through the series to be accepted at that level. We're very conscious of children's artwork as well, that there's some very, very beautiful expressions that come from children. There was a time when people said, that's not art, the kids are just mucking about. But now we have an international festival that is of the child's art that tours the world, and that is another area where we have children's festivals where it's strictly children's art form. And this is a lovely way, I think, for a community to move, because it brings more people out. Oh, it's my kid,
Right.
and they're willing to support that sort of concept. And when they see the growth in the child, then they're willing to participate too.
Neil Everts.
Do you have trouble maintaining your enthusiasm in these programs once they've been instigated? Or what do you do to keep them going? Or is that pretty much up to the community after they've once been implemented?
I'm very careful about how much enthusiasm I'll put into a project at all, because I have done that. I just love this, and it was my project, and it fell because of it, because as soon as I moved, that spirit, unless it's been captured. So I'm careful with that. I think the slow evolution, the steady evolution is very important. This is why this concept that we're playing now with the studio and the artist in residence, who's going to stay there for a while. It's his livelihood, it's his community, the pride, and that this is important, and he slowly will, evolve that. And our role in the state is to, provide grant money, matching funds, make suggestions, but if the community does not really pick up with it, then we have to step back.
Something else that I'm going to do is to pull you further into politics, and I know that
dear.
you'd rather stay out of that.
I like a fight.
You like a fight, okay, fine. Some individuals who are in politics and they are involved with the purse strings and making decisions indicate for education or for city governments or whatever it might be, that the use of public funds for any of the arts and the humanities is really a waste of money, and this is a concept that some people hold. I'm sure you've run into that before. They at least perceive in their mind that it's more abstract, and they can't grab a hold of it like you can with such things as construction of highways and bridges and so forth. How do you deal with this in those communities that you advise to try to get more cooperation from the public sector for this field?
I think we have to go back to answer that. We have to go back to how art survives in the United States, and it's basically private funds. If you're in Europe, the state takes care of it. So when I'm working, with a community, I talk, what is the power source and what is the money source? And what are the hobbies of those people? Because all of them, in some way, have an art interest. And and many times they'll say, well, we're not interested in that because they think a painting is going to hang in a gallery somewhere and they're never going to see it, so why should they pay for it? But if we can move art into their home environment and talk about their hobbies, and how did they get into those hobbies, and those kind of things like journalism, that's an art form. Writing is an art form. Poetry, fishing. It's amazing how much skill is put into the art of fishing. Now, if I talk to an artist about that, and they say, no, really, now you're carrying it a bit far. But coming in at that level where people can identify, or their child, and children, I think, are the keys in many ways. The children have this love for beauty, and to participate in, to appreciate it. And when you give a child a chance, to experience, and it's not, mommy patting them on the head, it's someone else saying that's phenomenal. And when the people see this, I think that they begin to realize that, you know, the bridge isn't just a bridge, it becomes a work of art. And if you're talking about the high-risers, maybe they're necessary, but you go back to the point of making them beautiful and lowering them.
Lou Reed.
Do you feel the National Endowment for the Arts has been performing a function that is stimulating and giving seed money in the right direction? Do you feel that the National Endowment has been a positive force?
I think in many ways to help companies and to help people that want to help themselves, and I think that the National Endowment has done that in helping some companies form, and certainly in developing some of the ethnic art forms. Your question, though, suggests that maybe you've had funds here that
Yes.
yes.
Within the state.
Mm-hmm.
Within the state.
And has there been a lot of controversy, perhaps, over?
No, I was just hoping you'd say, give a real pitch for the National Endowment for the Arts.
Oh.
But
Well, as an opera singer, I do, because you know the young companies that have formed through money, seed money from the National Endowment, has done a tremendous amount for our really, really talented young artists in singing, in the dance world, where you really had to go to Europe a long time ago, or when I was a student, to have a career in opera, you had to go to Europe. And now we have enough young opera companies and places for young people to perform. We're creating jobs, and really a lot of that does go to the National Endowment for the Arts.
I guess many of us are really concerned that the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, will be considered frivolous and may get the budget cuts a little bit sooner than they should. And so I think it's important to air your position.
Well, let me say that if that happens, it may happen for a year, but I have a feeling that there are enough artists and enough people, behind, in terms of political power, that something will change after that. So if 1 year, it would be failing.
That's a nice note of optimism. Thank
May
you.
I follow up on that by asking, are you saying some of those people that are in the art world in Hollywood and California may be able to have some influence in restoring funds? They do have a connection to the president.
Yes, they do. Well, they have a connection, but also the press and many other artists who, our name and who are household words. I'm sure that many of them have been brought up in leisure or have been brought up with endowment funds. And I work with a number, and I know they're very, very concerned that people have this opportunity, to experience art, and would be very supportive.
Thank you. I'm sorry we're out of time, and I express appreciation from our staff to you for being here today.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you, panel. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Dr. Nellie Arnold. She's been our fourth guest in our series of Art in Life and Leisure. We've attempted in these programs to show you and to indicate that art is a very important process in all aspects of our life. We hope you've enjoyed it. May I invite you to be with us again next week when we start a 6-week series on the question of DNA research and genetic engineering. We think that'll be most interesting and probably controversial. I hope you'll be with us then. Have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.